So, we're 3/5 of the way through. I just want to spend a moment to introduce the moderator, who is really a terrific scholar, an advocate, and an old friend, Professor Solangel Maldonado, Seton Hall Law School. Professor Maldonado is really one of the emerging national stars in child advocacy, in family law generally. She was recently appointed as a reporter for the American Law Institute's brand new creation of a restatement on family law, on children of the law, sorry. In other words, for those of you who aren't lawyers, what that means is for lawyers who aren't particularly familiar with an area of law, or if the state has not passed laws in a particular area affecting children, or for judges, most importantly, who are seeking guidance, often from their clerks, with respect to how to even conceptualize an issue that comes before them in the court, they look to the restatement of the law. And so anyone who has a hand in the creation of that law is not only considered one of the country's foremost experts, but wields a great deal of very important and learned influence. So we're very proud of her, and we're especially fortunate to have her here today to moderate this panel. Professor Maldonado.
Thank you, Professor Trout, and thanks to all of you for being here today. I mean, this has been a fabulous conference so far, and one of the things I just want to point out is, as a result of being here today, I'm going to go back to my co-reporters on the restatement and say, and really push for us to include some discussion of trauma in our restatement, because there's very little law in this area, as Mark Rosenbaum is going to tell us in a little bit. So this panel is actually going to address, I think, some of the questions that you have been asking since the first panel. Specifically, we're going to look at, how is it that systems are responding to trauma in children? What systemic responses are there? What are schools doing? What should schools be doing to address trauma? And we will also look at an issue that we haven't talked about at all, which is, what are some of the confidentiality issues that are raised if children are now identified as traumatized? So to start this discussion, we have three experts from the fields of social work, psychology, and law. So we're going to start with Dr. Lovie Jackson Foster, who is an assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh School of Social Work, and also has a secondary appointment in the Clinical and Translational Science Institute. Dr. Foster conducts interdisciplinary preventative health services research addressing adolescent mental health and trauma. She's currently developing a website, A+ Family Care, to educate and empower African American parents about the impact of cultural strengths and social problems on African Americans and the community at large. She also conducts research to help train healthcare providers to better understand and identify trauma. So Dr. Foster will share with us, among other things, relational models of trauma and possible interventions, including one that she will be piloting very soon to address trauma in young people. So let's welcome Professor Foster.
Thank you so much. It is truly an honor to be among the choir, including, having a cold or allergies or whatever this may be. So I ask you in advance to excuse my voice today. But one of the reasons that I'm honored is because it truly is my passion to talk about this issue and to work together with others who care so much and are so passionate. And as we were sitting at lunch, it came to mind to ask you, do Black Lives Matter? Because one of the things that I thought about is sometimes it's, and this is maybe my soapbox, as they say, but when you looked back at the crack epidemic, it was bad people, bad, parents. who raised these bad people who are now crack addicted. Nobody cared about the children who lost their parents to incarceration or overdoses. And but now, that it's opioids, there's money and there's power behind it, and it's these families need help. So I want us to keep that question in mind. That truly is my passion. This quote was taken from a book called The Lost Children of Wilder about child welfare populations. And a mother said this, and I am a mother. I'm clearly a black mother, a black woman, a sister, a daughter. And I feel like my life is an ongoing battle to hold on to my child. And that also means my traumatized child. So going back and looking at my own family history, and probably my biggest passion of all has become intergenerational trauma, because we have lost so many to so many different things, but we need to also remember that we need those people. We need to remember them, and we kind of need to go back to the streets to find those students who are no longer students as well, because they are in the juvenile justice system or on the streets. But what I'm going to talk about today are some student experiences and outcomes of emotional stress, trauma's effect on the brain. I'm going to breeze through it. Relationship boundary behavior model that hopefully may give us some insights for a framework when we talk about teachers and educators, administrators, and how to relate and how to change the school system for youth that are traumatized and other youth. Because I tend to believe that prevention is intervention and intervention is prevention. I mean, we can mince words to say we don't want to fund prevention, but it's whatever you call it, we need to do it and not worry about what it's called, but fund what's needed. And then talk about the interventions, some interventions that I'm aware of that I've been a slight part of in Pittsburgh, as well as the one that I'm kind of heading up in Pittsburgh right now. So this is I toiled with how to start this presentation, but I wanted to show I did a study, an arts-based focus group study in Pittsburgh. We had 99 total youth in about 21 different focus groups. This is an image of that a group of 4 young African-American males drew. And at the center of their map, you'll see let's see if I can use this. Oh, oops, no, I can't. But you see that their imagery of their community. So we asked the question, what factors in your community affect the emotional health and stress of young people in your community? And at the center of their map is a young guy with a bandana over his face and a gun. He's shooting at someone who is like himself but on the opposite team, trying to get money just like he is, but doesn't deserve it because I need it more. They're shooting at police and what they called lames and snitches in the corner. And where you see booth drawn there is their community where their housing is. And they talked about how this booth where you have to show your ID to get in is purported to make them safe and keep them safe, but really it holds them into the violence and the poverty and the oppression. And so later in my presentation, when I'm talking about interventions, I'll talk a little bit about what's seen here. What's on fire here is one boy drew a rec center and the other one said, well, he started drawing. We're saying, well, what is that you're drawing on it? And it was fire because we don't have them here. And so these were some of the images. And in this one, you see the dark cloud over this left section, and that was the community, the neighborhood where the houses and the homes were. But you see it's dimmed and it's dark and it's faded. And so these are some of the things that young people are talking about. This quote at the top, you're just like a tortoise in a shell, you don't want to come out, was a quote from a young woman when she was talking about sexual abuse and what's going on. It's cyberbullying, it's cyber victimization, as well as, I'm kind of home alone, I'm going to wander down the street. That's happening with them. But her statement was so profound, I don't want to come out. And this word cloud was from the African American male focus groups, but I put it up here so that you could see the words that stuck out and when they were talking about their emotional health and stress. So violence and drug crime, guns, money. And money was really around, they talked about shame and money and talked about we don't have it, we need to feed ourselves. I need a job that pays at least $15 an hour if I'm going to work, because I also need to give back to my grandmother who took care of me. And some of the young men even had kids. And you see bullying up there really big as well. For the African American females, they talked about violence. School was also part of theirs. For them, school, so also a big part of this, which was interesting, was that all the focus groups talked about schools, and they were viewed positively, except for the fact that they're boarded up in their communities or they don't have them. So even when we talk about schools, and again, where are our children? Are they even there still to get? So that's why my presentation was really about inside school and outside, because we know that trauma and this systemic trauma is everywhere. It crosses these planes, so beautifully drawn in the ecological model, but we know that these systems cross. And you to yourself are a system unto yourself. So all those things that we've talked about today that are going on within the person, but then these schools and their homes are located in communities that we have to find a way to get policymakers to hear that Black lives matter, that these children's lives matter, because they're the ones that are dropping out and failing big time. You know, and we're kind of going beyond them and going to get those who are opioid addicted and dying. But suicide has been on the rise for the past at least 10 years among African American males, and you don't hear about it. But all through these focus groups, they talked a lot about it. These communities, youth, families, and communities are consumed by terror. That was one of the statements that was associated with the killing of Jordan Edwards here, that his family was consumed by terror. They are afraid. So I am a mother of two 2.5-year-old boys, Magnus and Justice Foster, and I brought them here with me. It probably was bad judgment, but I do share that anxiety, that I don't want to leave my kids at home. If we're going to die, we're going to die together. I seriously, I mean, it is insane, and I'm a social worker, and I believe in mental health care, so I get it. You know, I get the supports I need, but at the same time, I want them with me. I want to be taking care of my babies. I want them right here, because I don't want them to be the next window shot out, you know, as I'm driving them from daycare. It's really, it sounds insane, but this, when you constantly hear it, it's amazing that with video cameras, the numbers that are still dying, and the cases that don't go to the big court, you know. But these are some of the stories. You've probably seen where the young child was arrested by police from, I think she was in kindergarten or first grade. This one where the young boy, his mom had bought him a head camera. He went on a trip to Belize with his school. The only African-American student, I believe, he was the only one, and died within arm's reach of students and teachers who were there to supervise him. So the trauma reverberates. It reverberates in these communities. And, you know, he's now one of the missing, but he's in the hearts of his mother and his friends and his loved ones that remain. And then just last week, another killing. And actually, I think it was this week, or maybe Sunday. But. So the outcomes, and I apologize you can't see this really well, but you know, they're mimicking what they've seen, or they're stunting and profiling, so that cool posing, so you know, to be hard on the street, to survive the street. But this is all about survival mode. It's all or nothing. So the three of the images here are of kids that killed themselves due to bullying, because they're questioning their sexual identity and who's there to support. So there's so many supports we need for the traumas occurring in our schools and our communities. Can anybody read that real quick? So it's a little bit challenging, right, to read, but traumatized students in the context of schools. Trauma has all these ramifications, and we've talked about them today, so I won't go through what's on our little gingerbread man, but that's trauma. And when students come with fear and anxiety and depression, spaced out, disorganized, uneasy, on edge, it's not easy. They're not having an easy time of reading either. So we've talked about the ramifications for academics. So I'm going to go quickly through, but you've kind of got the gist of the trauma responders are activated, and those things we need for cognitive functions and to learn in school are deactivated in the face of stress and in the face of this chronic, ongoing, compounding, cumulative violence and trauma. So again, their heightened sense of alarm is up because they're in survival mode all the time. And they must be. So if we don't reach beyond our schools, then what do we send them out there to take off the uniform and take off your shirt and pull out a gun so you look like you can play, so that you look fierce on the streets. So if we don't go beyond that, what's the use of educating them? So this is a model that I am getting familiar with. My collaborator, Raymond Logan, uses this to talk about how we might start to break down this survival mode instinct and move closer to relationship and building those attachment bonds. Because when you're not attached to something, whether it's teachers not attached to their leadership, and so they're just kind of going along for the ride, you don't engage. So if we want more engagement from these youth who have been traumatized, part of that is relationship building, and so much of this sounds like what other people have said today, but it's about reattaching and building trust and security in young people who may not have had that. So this model just suggests that building a healthy, strong relationship, we want to build in this area of appropriate relationship boundaries and spaces, the here for me, that my teacher is here for me, that my teacher who cares about me is supported by the next teacher if I need her right now, or if I need him right now. So, and that the teacher has appropriate boundaries, because also in some of the female focus groups that we did, one of their big threats were the security guards in the schools. Well, they sell drugs, not at school, but on the weekends. Oh yeah, this girl was attracted to the security guard, and they did it in the bathroom. This was their real talk to me about this, and then, another girl, oh, well, he was cute though, at least he was cute, but we're not teaching, we have to teach appropriate boundaries, and we have to lead by modeling. We know that. And so when we put them at risk, they don't know what to believe and what not to believe. So it is a school-wide effort, but I think this relationship boundary behaviors model kind of talks about how you kind of learn whether or not you're too close in, which may be abusive and threatening, and if I was a little bit bigger, you'd be scared. She'd be running right now if I was, but how do we know it's abusive? But it's things like being dissed or criticized, being hit, of course, and shaming. And those things often happen in schools. They often happen in families. So this is a model that I think is one relationship model that can be built out to families and communities. We could teach this model in family group counseling. We could teach it in a parent-teacher conference. We could teach, because it's simple, but it talks about boundaries. Because, again, this intergenerational trauma has had an effect. Like I recognize I need to start breaking away from my kids a little bit and getting rid of some of that anxiety. But I also recognize that there's still those predators, and there's still that sense of, somebody just died on the corner by my church last week. So, so it's kind of spreading this information about relationships and safety. And then if you're too far away, then it's deemed neglectful. And we know that, by second, third, fourth grade, African American children are starting to be pushed out or wanting to drop out. But it's when you don't relate to me, when you don't look me in the eye and say, I care about you, am I too far in? Am I too far away? What do you need from me today? We need to build on these relationship models that may be simple ways to get teachers informed and engaged and having correct boundaries to share information. Well, is this too much to share with this student? Is this too, but it may be a simple model that we could bring to schools to talk about how we build healthy relationships. And then again, project it out to communities. And then in the center is the responsive relationship. And you know that by communicating. Does this feel good to you or does it not? Like, I'm a person, I could get this close to you and feel good. But some people be like, that's way too close. This is good. So we want to know, but the only way we can know is by asking and by building. But that's what's building trust. So I don't know how my time is. So I'm going to go on now to interventions. These are some interventions that I think are happening in the area where I live and I'm a part of, and it sounds like in other places in different ways as well. But education or curriculum changes, because if we're still telling the lies in our curriculum, students aren't going to engage with that. They're going to read through it. They know there's something that doesn't seem quite right, but we still keep pounding those old history lessons, that are absent of African, Egypt and Africa as civilized, but awareness and connection and relationship models and youth engaged communities. So I just entitled this Honest History for both educators and students. Someone talked about undoing racism, but we need an honest history. And someone talked about how Native Americans and we've known for a long time about the Holocaust and how that trauma gets transmitted. But Joy Leary is who I'm very, very close to, but she is one of my mentors and aunties, but she talks about the history. And I found some very good, literally 5-minute videos that talk about the economic structure that led people to go capture Africans and dupe them into selling and trading their own. But if we don't know that, then we're disempowered thinking, oh, we were just weak and we gave each other up. So were we a colony of snitches and villages? Oh, we were giving each other up. That's all you hear. But we need to rewrite the history right. We need to educate educators, educate students, families, and community, put new lenses on inequality. I had the pleasure of reading Professor Trout's one of his writings, and he talks about inequality. And so that spatial inequality, and that is what those students were drawing. The booth, that's spatial inequality. It doesn't keep us safe, and we know it doesn't keep us safe, but how do we get out of it? So new perspectives on prevention and intervention and relationship building. This is my intervention that I'm working on that's funded by the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, but it's a technology-based intervention. I'm a social worker, so I'm working with people who do technology and working to engage youth. So part of my grant is focused on engagement. So it's not just Lovie sitting back and saying what do youth need to know, but it's engaging them in the process of, how can we put some models that represent you and talk about these things and really screen them and educate them before we even try to engage them around this stuff. They need to know. So, we had the therapeutic distance where you take their information, you get their screening and results, and you keep it and you file it. And if you want to see it, you need to go to a lawyer and then request this in the appropriate way. No, you share their information with them, you educate them a little bit about it, and make them more of a educated participant, an educated consumer, and an active player, and then engage them to healthy supports, connect them, and reconnect. So we're constantly in tune with where they are, because we know this changes over, one day Lovie's good and the kids can go to daycare and I'm not going to call all day. The next day, can I get them at 3 o'clock? I want them home. So we know that it's a cyclical process. But what's in a scarf? So this is the relationship model that my colleague Raymond Logan is using. So this SCARF model talks about status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness as some key important things to building a healthy attachment, to building empowerment, and to moving people away from that threat response that's always heightened and always ready to survive toward rewards and in their response. So here's just some, just talking about, again, the essential need for these parts of this model. So we all need a certain status and a certain certainty that we can trust and rely on what's going to happen. We need some sense of self-control, and we need relatedness. We need relationship. We need mentors. We need each other to go forward, and we need a sense that things are fair. So I just wanted to show some quick examples that relate to the context of school, but status. So if you feel dissed and you're being reprimanded in front of other students, that's going to draw you away, and that's going to heighten your sense of survival mode, and I just need to survive, so I'm going to get defensive, and I'm going to get in your face, again, even if it costs me suspension or whatever it is, but that's how I'm going to react, because it's a threat. So how would you work to flip that and give the students a sense of status in the classroom? Everybody's a leader over something. Make teams, whatever, what have you. But these are some ways that you can use this SCARF model. Certainty. So students living in poverty and unable to buy lunch. Like the gentleman said, I'm just remembering his first name was Trevor, but he talked about, when we send certain forms home and your parent doesn't have an occupation, your parent is deceased, your parent is incarcerated, so there's a lot of uncertainty around what happens when you live in poverty. Autonomy. Where can we build in some ways to give students some sense of control? And again, teachers are overly focused on discipline. How else do we relate to these students? And then fairness. You have to have a sense of fairness. I only partially believe that justice works right now. Because it has not been fair. So we have to find ways to build in fairness. And this also, so again, this is a model that my colleague Raymond Logan is using with schools, but he's also trying to share this with administrators to say, okay, with your teachers, how do you build a teacher's sense of status and certainty and autonomy? Where do teachers have control over how they do these relationships in schools and build in sense of safety and things in the classroom? So these are just a few models, but what's in a SCARF, is more valued and secure relationship, trust, happiness, and peacefulness. When you can share and be in relationship, build back attachments, and give people a sense of agency, then they can be more ready to learn. And then these just a few other things that I think are really important that I've learned from my focus group work. Again, there was 99 youth in my study. The majority were African American, but there were 65 African American. So who can add in this room? So the rest were white students. But community planning, I think we need more youth engaged communities. So not just parents, we need actually intergenerational community groups doing this, but we need them active in what makes your community safe. What would make you feel safe? How do we build relations between alternative communities? Connecting with elders as mentors and proxy grandparents. That's so important because they've had those lessons of being addicted and getting off drugs and surviving, or in different other life lessons. And then I said making worth marketing, because when we teach, again, it's about survival. If I cannot eat, there was a police officer in Georgia on the news who saw someone stealing literally a $2 pair of shoes for his sibling, went to the house, they had no food. What do we expect? Why would they sit in school and think, whatever I come out of here with is going to be less than? And we don't want to dumb down education because our students are traumatized. We want to create agency in ways that they can build. I'm working with technology people. There's tons of technology people who don't know how to relate to people. Okay, get a teacher, a mentor, a counselor, a technology person, and some students together, and they can create together. So make something that they can sell and market right from their classroom. It can be done, but we have to be innovative. And then lastly, youth and educators collaboratively identifying how you could transform this SCARF model. What is agency and autonomy for you? What self-control do you need? What can you do that gives you status in this classroom? How can we work this and engage people in this? So That's my story. I want to thank you all for the work you do, and I am because we are. And that's my little family.
Thank you, Dr. Prof. So our next speaker is Dr. Jennifer Jones, who is a licensed psychologist and an expert in child trauma. She completed a postdoctoral fellowship at Mount Sinai, and the focus of the fellowship was on traumatic stress, where she worked with youth in the juvenile justice system. She's currently the Associate Director of Mental Health for Adolescent and Youth Adult Populations at Rikers Island, the prison. She also facilitates trainings for juvenile probation and correction officers and other professionals across the country on the impact of trauma on young people. And she also recently spearheaded a committee to address how educators and counselors respond to race, the intersection of race and trauma in the classroom. So today, Dr. Jones is going to talk to us about the influence of trauma on the school-to-prison pipeline and the ways that school can address this. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's such a rainy day, but I'm so glad we're here where it's nice and warm and we get to talk about what we can do about the issue of trauma. Like she said, I'm currently the Associate Director of Mental Health for young adults at Rikers Island. So I have the 18 and 21-year-olds. And I feel like it's a privilege to be able to be there because a lot of these young people, when you actually hear their stories and not just their crimes, you get to know their background, get to know kind of what led them there. And a lot of my career has been leading me up to the point of really understanding that it all starts sometimes in the home and in the classroom. That's why a lot of my research and a lot of the work that I do is really understanding how trauma impacts the young people before they get into the system, before they get into my doors or on my unit. So this is a quote I found that said, "Man, this school shit is a joke. The same people who control the school system, control the prison system, and the whole social system ever since slavery." Know what I'm saying? Dead prez. And when I came across, this is a hip hop duo out of New York, when I came across this quote, how real it is to a lot of the young people I work with. They really feel like it's the system against them. They enter into school like any other child when they, kindergarten or preschool, and from a very early age, things start piling up against them. And when you hear about the communities in which a lot of the people that I work with come from, the concern is not just where you physically abused, sexually abused, emotionally abused. You have gang life that we have not touched on today, and you also have severe community violence. So what I'm going to be talking to you today about is really understanding how pervasive trauma is in the lives of young people who are involved in the justice system, but know that they were once in the school systems. They didn't just happen to show up at Rikers one day. They were in the classrooms, they were in the churches, they were in the synagogues, they were in the community YMCA, and now that they're 18, 19 years old, they're on my unit. So, defining the problem, we always hear this, what's the school to prison pipeline? And really, there's so many influences on it that I could actually do a whole 6-hour talks on this, so I won't do that to you today. But it's really the policies and the procedures that strategically push out certain populations from the school system, whether it be consciously or unconsciously. That's up for debate. But the pathway usually starts from the classroom. And my sister's a teacher, so I don't want anybody thinking I'm going to teacher bash or anything like that. But are we equipping our teachers, our school counselors? I see a lot of people shaking their heads. Our school psychologists, our administrators, to really understand the pervasive problem of trauma. There are many consequences to the school to prison pipeline, but just some basic consequences is increased dropout rates and risk of falling further behind in school. So you get a young person who ends up in a detention center, who in New Jersey, they still have schooling while you're in the detention center, but a lot of times they get so far behind. And when they return to the school, they're not where they left off, per se. I'm not sure if you know the stat, but 68% of federal prisoners do not have a high school diploma. That's huge. And so when you couple that with, not only have they been traumatized before getting into the system, you're also dealing with the trauma of actually being involved in the system. So when you go to these facilities, you're being strip searched, your livelihood's threatened sometimes if you're of a different gang or a different set. Additionally, staff, I work at Rutgers, I enjoy working at Rutgers, but I always hear all the negative stuff about Rutgers, so it doesn't happen on my unit. But know that this stuff is real and can happen. There's trauma within the system. Being separated from your family and your community is also traumatic. So we talk about how young people, they're in the homes, they might face domestic violence, they might face physical, sexual abuse, community violence, and then when they've committed a crime and they're taken away from that community, that's actually traumatic as well, because they're not able to be with the people who love them, care for them, and support them in a way in which benefits them. And then, again, the pipeline doesn't just go from school, usually I work at a jail, it goes from school to juvenile justice, and a lot of times it continues on into adult incarceration. So it is a pipeline, but I do want to offer you hope and encouragement that it doesn't have to end. Like, the story doesn't have to end the way we always hear. School to prison. How about school to college? School to standing up here in front of all you wonderful people. So the idea that it ends with prison, it doesn't have to. And even if it goes that far, how do we reintegrate our youth and our adults back into the community? The color of the pipeline. So Black youth comprise of 17% of all juveniles in this country, but they make up 31% of arrests in this country as well. And so it's very disproportionate when you're looking at the number of students that are actually in schools and in our communities, and who's actually being arrested and for what reasons. Black youth are more likely to be referred to juvenile courts than white youth. They're more likely to be processed and not diverted. They're more likely to be sent to secure confinement, and they're more likely to be transferred to adult facilities. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with New York, but New York is one of two states, almost not anymore, that charges 16 and 17-year-olds as adults. So at Rikers Island, we have 16 and 17-year-olds in their own building, in their own housing unit, who are being charged as adults. We just passed raise the age in New York. Thank God. So the Rikers Island will be phasing out the young people from being on the island. And the reason why they hired me is because for years they've been using solitary confinement. New York and Rikers is the first jail in this country that has phased out solitary confinement for 18 to 21-year-olds. And I'm so proud to be part of that initiative. And the trauma, a lot of us have heard the many stories, Khalif Broader, and have seen things on the internet, but the idea that you're taking a traumatized youth who's done crimes, so it doesn't excuse their behavior. I always have to make that caveat when I talk to officers. It doesn't excuse them from committing crimes, but sometimes it explains their behavior. But if you take a youth who's done something, and then you put them in a situation where they're not really being treated or rehabilitated, but kind of housed, and then put back into the community, that's not helpful either. And so one of the things that I worked really hard on is how do we actually start changing the mindset of the Department of Corrections, of lawyers, of prosecutors, of officers, and then of the youth themselves. It's on the youth as well to be educated about that their behavior sometimes is a reaction and not their choice. But that's a whole nother talk. So what actually contributes to the school to prison pipeline? Again, we're talking about policies, things such as the broken window policy. I'm not sure if you heard of that, but they use that a lot in corrections, where the idea is you crack down on something very small. So I steal her purse. You throw the book at me so she doesn't steal her purse next time. Versus looking at the bigger crimes that can happen. You're cracking down on the really little things. And schools have started doing that. They've started to criminalize normative behavior. So if I am mad, I happen to know Karen in the front row. So if Karen's my teacher and I go up to Karen and I start talking back to her, and that ends up being, what's the term? Not insubordination, but like just aggressive behavior. If I get into a fight, that's now assault. If I steal something or take somebody's pencil, that's now theft. And so we start criminalizing normal adolescent behaviors, and then some of the normal adolescent behaviors are so skewed because of the trauma. We defined trauma. We didn't talk too much about PTSD, but the idea of what are they exhibiting. We talked about what is trauma. It's the experience or exposure of actual threat and death, serious injury or sexual violation. And I enjoyed Dr. Solangel. She was explaining that the idea that this is just one way of defining trauma. However, we often forget all the different things that can go into being traumatized. So if myself and Lovie, we're both standing here right now, somebody comes in, steals my wallet, steals Lovie's wallet, I'm never coming back to Rutgers, I'm never coming back to Newark, you won't see me again. Lovie's like, when's the next talk? I'll be here. So the way we both reacted to it was different, but we both experienced the trauma. And a lot of our young people react very differently to things. You're like, your daddy's got arrested yesterday. How are you okay? How are you not, crying or being upset? And it's because of the different coping skills that our youth have learned to deal with pervasive and chronic trauma. It looks like normal behavior. It looks like normal circumstances to them, but they don't understand that what they're going through is very abnormal. So these are different types of trauma and traumatic events. With emotional, sexual abuse, prostitution, and sex trafficking is huge in this country. Natural disasters, and just a focus on community violence. Repeated exposures to images and stories of trauma in students' communities or in the news can impact a student's emotional, psychological, and behavioral and physical functioning. And I know how it impacts my emotional, psychological, physical functioning when I happen to be on Facebook one day watching somebody get shot in the car and die on video, and how it's played over and over again. People are sharing, live streaming an officer killing a young man. So imagine seeing that at night. It wasn't in my community. I live in New Jersey. It wasn't here. But how it impacted me. How is it impacting the youth that have to come into your classroom the next day and learn about it, but not talk about the elephant in the room? So if you get a chance, I have some websites at the end. NCTSN.org, the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, we try to equip teachers with tools of how do you address trauma and racial trauma in the classroom. So I'll show those sites in a few. So complex trauma is the exposure of multiple and prolonged traumatic events that is chronic and usually happens earlier in age. And it kind of compounds upon each other. So 70 to 90% of youth involved in the juvenile justice system have experienced some form of trauma. And so if you think of that they're in the juvenile justice system, they were also at one point in the school system. And if they're under 18, they should still be enrolled in the school system. The average number of trauma types experienced is 6 or more traumas. So when you think about the ACE test, which was a very groundbreaking study, it never takes into account how long a trauma has happened. So say, for example, you check the box, yes, I was physically abused. What if you were physically abused for 10 years? That's still just one ACE. That's still 1/8. So we're talking about 6 or more traumas: physically abused, sexually abused, emotionally abused, parent incarcerated. You're naming the traumas, and it's not taking into account the depth of the trauma. And so a lot of our young people who are in the schools, who eventually end up in the justice system, have trauma that it's almost hard to fathom sometimes. And then lastly, 30 to 50% develop PTSD. And what's interesting is that soldiers coming from home from Iraq and from overseas, from active war countries, their rates of PTSD are the same as youth involved in the juvenile justice system. And so it kind of puts into perspective that our youth are really struggling and going through, and we're not catching them when we should, and they're ending up in our system. So PTSD, for those of you who aren't psychologists, these are some of the things that you have to have in order to be diagnosed with PTSD. I'm not going to go deep into it, but I did want to talk about the hyperarousal reactivity. So hyperarousal reactivity, the reason why I'm highlighting this is because a lot of the youth in the justice system fit this category. They're more externalizing behaviors than internalizing behaviors. So they're the irritable kids, the kids with aggressive outbursts, the youth who have poor concentration, poor sleep, and very self-destructive behaviors. I think of them as always being on their balls of their feet, like just kind of ready to pounce. You know, it's just like right now, flat-footed, I'm enjoying being here. And if she looks at me, I'm thinking, oh, she's admiring my outfit, yes. But if I was on the balls of my feet, ready to pounce, and she's looking at me, and I can just like, what are you looking at? Be very quick to react. And so, as you know, I'm a psychologist, so I'm about to do an experiment on you all. Are you ready? Okay, so everybody look at me. Is everybody looking at me? Okay, right there, but don't look. There's a sniper with his gun trained on us, but don't look at him. Look at me for the next 5 minutes, because that's what you're supposed to do when you're at a conference. That's what we tell our youth to do in classrooms. We say, don't worry about what's out there, who's going to get you, there's no food at home, mom getting beat by dad, pay attention to me for the next 7 hours so you can learn math, science, and English. All right? Okay, you can look up there. No, nobody's up there. But that's kind of what we're doing to our youth. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is because one of the areas of my focus is school discipline, that the idea that the juvenile crime rate, well, not the crime rate, but the amount of youth actually incarcerated is actually going down, which is a good thing. It's really a good thing, because they're trying to do alternative to incarceration placements. But what's happening is school discipline is moving in the opposite direction. You know, out-of-school suspensions have increased about 10% since the year 2000. We're looking at about 3.3 million students who are suspended or expelled each year, and there has to be another way. You know, there has to be. Oh, there it is, 3.3 million, and that's from the National Center for Educational Statistics. The most likely consequence of suspension is more suspension. So I got suspended for stealing her wallet. Next week, I'm the perfect kid. I'm gonna come in. I'm never getting suspended again. That helps for the youth who are really afraid and deterred by suspension. You're talking about youth who are hypervigilant, who have to defend themselves, who have to prove a point that you can't tell me anything, and I get suspended. Next week, what's going to happen? I'm gonna steal her wallet this time, you know. And so it's not really the behavior. It's more about what's driving the behavior. These aren't bad kids. These are kids that have had bad things happen to them.